A woman sits in my office, tears streaming down her face. "I have everything I thought I wanted," she whispers. "Perfect marriage, successful career, beautiful children. So why do I feel like I'm dying inside?" This woman isn't broken. She isn't ungrateful. She's experiencing something Carl Jung called the crisis of meaning. The moment when your outer life no longer matches the truth of who you really are. Have you ever felt like you're living someone else's life? Like there's a part of you screaming to break free, but you don't even know what it's trying to say? Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered who that person really is beneath all the roles they play? What I'm about to share with you is Jung's most dangerous insight. Dangerous because once you understand it, you can never go back to living unconsciously. By the end of this exploration, you'll discover the hidden force that's been controlling your choices, sabotaging your relationships, and keeping you from the life you were born to live. This revelation has the power to either liberate you completely or terrify you into staying exactly where you are. The choice, as Jung discovered, is entirely yours. My name is your name, and today we're diving deep into the shadowy corridors of the unconscious mind, following in the footsteps of one of history's greatest explorers of the human soul, Carl Gustav Jung. What I'm about to share with you isn't found in any psychology textbook. It's the lived experience of a man who dared to look into the abyss of his own psyche and emerged with a map for the rest of us. But first, let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt truly, authentically yourself? Not the version of you that shows up to work, not the you that performs for family or friends, but the real you. The you that exists when all the masks come off. If you're struggling to answer that question, you're not alone. Jung discovered that most of us spend our entire lives running from our authentic selves, and in doing so, we create invisible wounds that never truly heal. Jung's journey into the depths of the psyche began not in a university classroom, but in the midst of his own psychological crisis. In 1913, at the age of 38, this successful psychiatrist and former protégé of Freud found himself plunging into what he would later call his confrontation with the unconscious. For 6 years, Jung experienced what many would consider a complete psychological breakdown. He heard voices, saw visions, and felt as though he was losing his grip on reality. But here's what makes Jung's story extraordinary. Instead of running from this darkness, he chose to engage with it. He began what he called active imagination, a practice where he would deliberately enter into dialogue with the figures and images that emerged from his unconscious mind. He drew, he painted, he wrote. Most famously, he created what would become known as the Red Book, a leather-bound journal filled with his encounters with the deepest layers of his psyche. During this period, Jung encountered what he would later identify as archetypal figures. The wise old man appeared to him as a character named Philemon, an elderly figure with kingfisher wings and the horns of a bull. Through conversations with Philemon, Jung began to understand that the psyche contains autonomous complexes, living entities within us that have their own agenda and wisdom. But it wasn't just mystical figures that Jung encountered. He also came face to face with his shadow, that part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge or accept. The shadow contains all the qualities we've rejected about ourselves since childhood. Every time someone told you to be good, every time you suppressed anger, jealousy, or selfish desires, those rejected parts didn't disappear. They formed your shadow, growing stronger in the darkness of your unconscious. Think about it for a moment. What qualities do you most despise in other people? What behaviors make your blood boil? Jung discovered that these strong reactions are often projections of our own shadow material. The things we hate most in others are frequently the very qualities we've banished from our own conscious awareness. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. Jung once worked with a patient, a devoutly religious woman who prided herself on her purity and moral superiority. She came to him because she was having disturbing dreams filled with sexual imagery and violent scenes. She was horrified by these dreams and couldn't understand why her unconscious would produce such evil content. Jung helped her see that her extreme identification with being good had created an equally extreme shadow filled with everything she considered bad. Her dreams weren't evil manifestations, they were her psyche's attempt to balance her one-sided conscious attitude. The more she tried to be perfect, the more her shadow compensated with imperfection. This is the first invisible wound Jung identified, the wound of self-rejection. Every time we push away a part of ourselves, we create an internal division. We become enemies to ourselves, constantly at war with our own nature. This internal conflict manifests in anxiety, depression, relationship problems, and a persistent feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with us. But Jung discovered something revolutionary. These invisible wounds, these rejected parts of ourselves, contain tremendous energy and wisdom. The very qualities we've banished often hold the key to our greatest potential. The person who rejects their anger might need to reclaim their ability to set boundaries. The one who denies their selfishness might need to learn healthy self-care. The individual who represses their darkness might need to embrace their power. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward psychological wholeness. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming complete. It's about integrating all parts of ourselves, light and dark, into a unified whole. This is where the real transformation begins, but it requires tremendous courage. Remember, I mentioned that Jung would reveal a profound secret by the end of our time together. We're building toward that revelation. But first, you need to understand the landscape of your own unconscious. Jung discovered that our personal unconscious, filled with our individual shadow material, sits on top of something even deeper, the collective unconscious. This is a layer of the psyche shared by all humanity, containing what Jung called archetypes. These are universal patterns of human experience that shape our lives in profound ways. The mother archetype influences how we nurture and seek nurturing. The hero archetype drives our quest for meaning and achievement. The lover archetype shapes our capacity for passion and connection. The sage archetype guides our search for wisdom and truth. These archetypal energies are constantly at work in our lives, whether we're conscious of them or not. But here's where it gets interesting. Just as we can have a personal shadow, we can also be possessed by the shadow side of archetypes. The mother can become the devouring mother who suffocates rather than nurtures. The hero can become the destroyer who conquers at all costs. The lover can become the addict who seeks pleasure without connection. The sage can become the know-it-all who uses knowledge as a weapon. Jung realized that many of our invisible wounds come from being unconsciously identified with or possessed by archetypal energies. The person who can't stop rescuing others might be possessed by the hero archetype. The individual who becomes manipulative in relationships might be channeling the shadow side of the magician. The one who cannot stop seeking approval might be under the influence of the wounded child archetype. These archetypal possessions create patterns that repeat throughout our lives. You know those situations where you find yourself reacting in the same way over and over again, even though you swear you'll do it differently next time? That's often an archetypal complex at work, an autonomous part of your psyche that has its own agenda. Jung spent years learning to recognize and dialogue with these archetypal energies within himself. He discovered that the path to healing these invisible wounds wasn't to eliminate these forces, but to develop a conscious relationship with them. This is the essence of psychological maturity, not being unconsciously driven by archetypal energies, but consciously choosing how to work with them. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine someone who grew up with an absent or emotionally unavailable father. This person might carry the wound of the orphan archetype, constantly seeking the father they never had in romantic partners, bosses, or authority figures. This archetypal wound might drive them to either become overly dependent on others or fiercely independent to avoid disappointment. Jung's approach wouldn't be to simply get over this wound, but to recognize the archetypal pattern and begin to consciously parent themselves. They would need to develop their own inner father, their own capacity for strength, guidance, and protection. This isn't about denying their need for masculine energy. It's about becoming conscious of that need and learning to fulfill it from within. This brings us to one of Jung's most important discoveries: the process of active imagination. This is a technique where you consciously engage with the images, figures, and emotions that arise from your unconscious. Instead of just thinking about your problems, you enter into an imaginative dialogue with them. Jung would encourage his patients to imagine their depression as a figure and ask it what it wanted. He would have them visualize their anxiety and discover what message it was trying to convey. He understood that symptoms aren't just problems to be eliminated. They're messengers from the unconscious, carrying important information about what needs attention in our lives. One of Jung's most famous examples involves a patient who kept having dreams about a black snake. Instead of interpreting the snake symbolically, Jung encouraged the patient to imagine sitting with the snake and asking it questions. Through this dialogue, the patient discovered that the snake represented her repressed, instinctual nature, her connection to her body and sexuality that she had rejected due to her strict religious upbringing. The snake wasn't threatening her. It was trying to restore balance to her psyche. This is the heart of Jung's revolutionary approach. Instead of seeing symptoms as pathology, he saw them as the psyche's attempt at self-healing. Depression might be the psyche's way of forcing a pause when we've been moving too fast. Anxiety might be alerting us to something that needs attention. Anger might be telling us that our boundaries have been violated. These invisible wounds aren't just scars, they're wisdom waiting to be discovered. But Jung also understood that this journey into the unconscious could be dangerous without proper preparation. He often spoke of the need for what he called a strong ego before undertaking deep psychological work. This doesn't mean being egotistical, but rather having a stable sense of self that can withstand the dissolution and reconstruction that comes with facing our shadow and archetypal material. Jung's own journey into the unconscious nearly cost him his sanity. He later wrote that if he hadn't had his family, his work, and his connection to the everyday world, he might never have found his way back from the depths he explored. This is why he emphasized the importance of what he called the transcendent function, the bridge between conscious and unconscious that allows us to integrate new material without being overwhelmed by it. The transcendent function often manifests through dreams, creativity, meaningful coincidences that Jung called synchronicities, and moments of sudden insight or understanding. It's the psyche's natural healing mechanism, constantly working to bring consciousness and unconsciousness into dialogue. Jung discovered that paying attention to dreams was one of the most reliable ways to access this healing wisdom. Dreams aren't random neural firing, they're the unconscious mind's attempt to communicate with consciousness. Every dream figure represents an aspect of yourself. Every dream scenario reflects your current psychological situation, and every dream symbol carries multiple layers of meaning. But Jung's approach to dream interpretation was radically different from Freud's. While Freud looked backward to childhood trauma and repressed memories, Jung looked forward to unrealized potential. He saw dreams not just as expressions of what was wrong, but as guidance toward what could be made whole. For example, if someone dreams of being chased, Jung wouldn't just ask what they're running from, but what they're running toward. The pursuing figure might represent rejected aspects of themselves that are trying to be integrated. The running might represent their resistance to change or growth. The landscape of the dream might reveal the psychological terrain they're navigating. Jung also discovered that dreams often come in series, telling a story over time about the dreamer's psychological development. He would encourage his patients to keep dream journals and look for recurring themes, symbols, and figures. Over time, patterns would emerge that revealed the unconscious mind's roadmap for healing and growth. Now, as we near the end of our journey together, let me share with you the profound secret I promised at the beginning. After decades of exploring the depths of the human psyche, after confronting his own shadow and integrating his own archetypal material, Jung arrived at a startling conclusion about the nature of psychological healing. He discovered that our invisible wounds, our symptoms, our struggles and our suffering are not obstacles to overcome, but the very path to our deepest wisdom and strength. Jung realized that the goal of psychological development isn't to eliminate problems, but to find the meaning and purpose hidden within them. This is what Jung called the transcendent function of suffering. Our wounds become sacred when we learn to see them not as evidence of our brokenness, but as initiations into deeper levels of consciousness. The person who has experienced depression and learned to navigate it develops a compassion and depth that those who have never suffered cannot possess. The individual who has faced their shadow and integrated their rejected parts develops an authenticity and wholeness that is truly rare. Jung discovered that wholeness doesn't mean perfection, it means completeness. It means embracing all of who you are, light and dark, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and foolishness. It means developing what he called the self with a capital S, the archetype of wholeness that transcends the ego's limited perspective. The self doesn't judge or reject any part of your experience. It sees your anxiety as protection, your anger as boundary setting, your sadness as depth, your joy as celebration. The self understands that every emotion, every symptom, every wound carries a gift that cannot be received any other way. This is Jung's ultimate revelation. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are whole and in need of remembering. Every invisible wound you carry is a doorway to greater consciousness. Every rejected part of yourself is a treasure waiting to be reclaimed. Every archetypal possession is an invitation to develop more conscious choice. The path to healing these invisible wounds isn't about eliminating them, but about developing a new relationship with them. It's about learning to see your struggles as sacred initiations, your symptoms as wise messengers, and your shadow as your greatest teacher. Jung's journey through his own darkness led him to discover that the psyche has an inherent drive toward wholeness. Given the right conditions, consciousness and unconsciousness naturally seek integration. The transcendent function is always working, always trying to heal the divisions within us, always guiding us toward greater completeness. Your invisible wounds are not evidence of your failure. They are proof of your courage. They show that you have lived fully enough to be marked by life, that you have loved deeply enough to be hurt, that you have dreamed boldly enough to be disappointed. These wounds are your credentials as a human being who has dared to engage with the full spectrum of existence. Jung's final gift to us is the understanding that individuation, the journey toward wholeness, never ends. It's not a destination to arrive at, but a way of traveling through life. Each day offers new opportunities to integrate rejected parts of ourselves, to dialogue with our archetypal energies, to find meaning in our struggles, and to choose consciousness over unconscious reaction. As we conclude this exploration into the Jungian path of healing, I want to invite you to begin your own journey of integration. Start paying attention to your dreams. Notice what triggers strong emotional reactions in you. Begin to dialogue with your symptoms instead of just trying to eliminate them. Ask yourself what your invisible wounds might be trying to teach you. Remember, Jung discovered that the treasure you seek is guarded by the dragon you most fear to face. Your greatest strength often lies hidden beneath your greatest vulnerability. Your deepest wisdom emerges from your willingness to embrace the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime rejecting. If this exploration has resonated with you, if you feel called to continue this journey of psychological and spiritual discovery, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and join our growing community of fellow travelers on the path of individuation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What invisible wounds are you ready to transform into sources of strength? In our next video, we'll dive even deeper into Jung's practical techniques for shadow work and active imagination. We'll explore specific methods for dialoguing with your unconscious and integrating the wisdom hidden in your dreams. This is just the beginning of a transformative series that will guide you step by step along the Jungian path to wholeness. Until then, remember Jung's words. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. The same is true for healing, for wholeness, for the authentic life you've always sensed was possible. The mirror in the darkness is waiting. Your true reflection is ready to be seen. The question is, are you ready to look?